I am really excited to be in conversation with you, Angela, because we are in the midst of a major paradigm shift on care.
Yes.
And you're one of the leaders changing the conversation, not only by helping us understand the essential role of care in our society and economy, but making the case that care work is the most important work that anyone can do.
Yes, absolutely.
Here I'm going to quote from your book.
Okay.
Home is where the real work, the work that never changes, never stops, never goes away, gets done. American society values work in terms of how much we produce and how efficiently we can do it. It tells us that our output is our worth. Caregiving, conversely, is inefficient, but it pays dividends. If we were to think about work in terms of our humanity, making people feel dignified, valued, and whole, then caregiving is the most important work we can do with our time on earth.
Yes.
Your words, not mine. Angela, you're challenging us here to broaden from an economics-only lens and to claim our values. And we actually want everyone to feel dignified, valued, and whole. But how do we accomplish that? How do we do that is the conversation we're going to be having today. Because in my mind, it does require this narrative shift and this work that you're moving forward, trying to move an understanding that care is infrastructure, as important as hard infrastructure like roads and bridges, and it also requires investment.
Yes.
Right? Like that talking about it and recognizing it as such is not enough if there aren't actual dollars that match the opportunity. That means that funded policy interventions at the local, state, and federal levels can create a sustainable care infrastructure. So let's dig in.
Okay.
On why care work is still unfinished business,
Yes.
and what to do about it.
Okay.
And I think the way we do that is if you could just talk to us a little bit more about mothering as the main concept of your book.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I got kind of choked up when you were saying, I mean, it's wonderful when someone like reads you back to yourself and you're like, oh, that was pretty good. But the idea of care as being, yeah, like we're productivity, fine, you know, like we're all working under the system, we all need money. But when I think about that, and I think this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, you know, for the past few weeks because of things that are going on in the world of like humanity, right? Like that's the really unifying thing that I think is what matters when it all gets down to it. And that is the most important work we could ever possibly doing. Like to see you as a human being, to have you see me, to have that connection. And so, you know, mothering is what makes that possible, right? Like, obviously, the focus of my book, because I was a mother who stopped doing professional work during the pandemic without any childcare, I was thinking a lot about childcare, right? And how mother is an important identity that I have, but it's a noun. And when we think of motherhood, it's like, it doesn't move. Like, it's just like a thud. But the work, and it really is work, repetitive work, is that verb of mothering. And I love that because it is not gender specific. It is not parent specific, right? And there's a wonderful book called Revolutionary Mothering, which is essays, and it's collected by Alexis Pauline Gumbs, China Martins, and Maya Williams. And so I'm not the first person to do this, but they define mothering as anyone who is involved in the work of nurturing and sustaining life. And that's everyone, right? And you know, raising children and caring for our elderly, caring for people who need care, are most vulnerable. And you know, how we treat our most vulnerable says a lot about our society. That is not a private thing. That is everyone's responsibility. That is everyone's work. And so I wanted to find a way to call people into this work, to call everyone in, because you can be taking care of other people, but also like, congratulations, good job, everyone. You mothered yourselves into getting here. You took a shower, you fed yourself, right? That's mothering, and that's real work.
So part of our work, and as we think about delivering and advancing this bold new consensus, is to imagine and deliver a new social contract where families are supported in their own caregiving, where they can have access to this high quality, affordable care when they need it, and where the people doing the care work are empowered and compensated with living wages. And so you write a lot about why it's undervalued. And so can you give us a little bit more of why, and who are the people doing the work?
Yeah. I mean, the reason why care work is undervalued in America is because of racism. It's a direct line from slavery to now. So for Black women in America, the home has always been a place of work. And so when we, as we, advanced as a society, and when women were encouraged to seek meaning outside of the home, which is very important for people to do, because we shouldn't be defined by one role, that was really, like, the second wave feminist movement really benefited white women, right? And we said, go and pursue meaning outside of the home, which is fantastic, go do that. That never solves the issue of domestic work. And so what we did then was just hire Black women and women of color to do domestic labor at poverty wages. And really the reason why it's Black and brown women who do the majority of caregiving, professional caregiving in our country. Child care workers are often women of color and mothers who are 2 times more likely to live in poverty. These are the lowest average, the average wage. The median wage for any industry in America is close to $20 an hour, which we all know, by the way, is not enough really to live on. But when we talk about domestic workers, that median wage drops down to closer to $11 and $12 an hour. So the people that we are trusting to take what we say is the most precious thing, like our children, our future, we will not pay them a living wage, and that is so shameful. And again, it really just comes down to, as a country, we are comfortable seeing women who look like us as less than human, as less deserving, and we see the work as not skilled work, which is a total myth that people buy into to sustain this inequitable system. It's not complicated, unfortunately.
I feel a little emotional because I think about my own trajectory in the United States.
Yeah.
I was born in Peru and we moved here when I was 10 years old. My mother is a housekeeper today, and before she was a housekeeper, she was caring for people's kids.
Yeah.
And something happens, and you write about this in your book, where there's a role reversal when you arrive at a new country, right? Where often kids end up taking on this parental roles. And people begin to treat our parents like they are not there.
Right.
And so I have been my mom's advocate for a really long time. I think maybe I learned my advocacy skills from speaking with many of her clients when she didn't know how to advocate for herself. And something happens where people begin to internalize the way that people treat them.
Yes.
And our society does that all the time. Something happens where, my mom would show up at home and somehow feel like, well, this person hasn't paid me for months, but I still have to show up and do the work. I'm like, you don't have to show up to do the work. That person owes you a paycheck. Yeah. And so I do see as our collective responsibility to not only advance the policies, right, but to also do the kind of organizing work that enables people's transformation, such that when they show up to care for someone's kids, or when they show up to do the work that makes all our work, all the other work possible, that when they fill in this infrastructure, that they see themselves as powerful agents.
Yes. And they should know that they are essential workers. They are the people, and this was exposed in the pandemic. Without caregivers, without people coming to help clean our homes, right? Those sorts of essential things that keep our daily lives running, when those things couldn't happen, I mean, America was at a standstill. People were panicking. And people who were like, a lot of women, affluent women were like, I have leaned in, right? And yet, somehow I'm still here holding a broom and figuring out the childcare, and figuring out how to do online school, right? We need to actually, there's this narrative that happens, right, that we're trying to change about the essential nature of caregivers. But one of the things that happens is it's so deeply ingrained that sometimes the call is coming from inside the house, right? That like, I am very quick to be like, oh, I'm just doing my mom stuff, right? Or I'm just doing laundry, but like, that is like, that's a full other, that's my real job, right? And then it's like a privilege to be able to do this writing work and to be able to share a stage with you, and it's because someone's watching my kids, right? Like, and actually it got easier because my fantasy has finally come true, which is that I have 2 kids in public school, right? So I have like a good chunk of my income back, but you know, I'm still doing, like they live rent-free in my mind, right? Like I'm still thinking about them and doing that work. It happens all the time, yeah.
Yeah, and how do we understand the people who are providing this kind of infrastructure and compensate them as such? Because they also have lives.
Yes.
You know, something happens where we think these people are able to check out at the door, but I remember, well, I didn't have my mom around.
Yeah.
Because she was taking care of someone else's
I always
kids.
think about that. Who is watching the kids of the people who are watching our kids, right? And I think that's one of the things, like, I'm about to go, a few of us here are going to Los Angeles because Caring Across Generations and the Domestic Workers Alliance is having CareFest, and I'm doing a panel called Caring for the Caregiver. And I think when people hear that title, they're like, I want to figure out how to take care of myself. And that's great, but I want us to think about, when we think about caring for the caregiver, it's not us that we're supposed to be thinking about. It's supposed to be the people who are making it possible to be at a conference in the first place, right? And I think that's the sort of, like, solidarity is what we need to start building, right? Across class, across race, and it is realizing that the people we hire to clean our homes and to take care of our children are no different from us. And when we take care of them, yes. And when we have wins for professional childcare providers, for domestic workers, like, we are that much closer to getting those things for ourselves, you know? Mothers, parents who are stay-at-home parents, right? Like, we're closer to seeing that work as valuable when we see it, when we are able to give professional workers rights and protections.
I'm so glad that you named solidarity, because in movement building work and in organizing, we can only win if we really center and ground ourselves in solidarity. It's a key ingredient to growing our power. And so I'm curious, you named the National Domestic Workers Alliance. There's a lot happening in the world. And so, and here at home, what kind of movements give you hope?
I mean, I think the thing that gives me hope is something that last night there were a few of us gathered at Chris's home, and Natalie said something about how, you know, in times of crisis, like, we pick up ideas that were there. And what gives me hope is that we are returning to, so this, I mean, you know, it does give me tremendous that hope that for a brief period of time in the pandemic, we were giving people money, which is an acknowledgement that keeping yourself alive in a country that does not guarantee human rights, and by that I mean family leave, housing, right, an income, right, healthcare, like, we don't have those things. And so keeping yourself alive in this country is work. We all know that. It's harder work for a lot of people, and, like, just ask any Black mother, just ask a trans person, right, anyone from a minority or an oppressed group, right? So paying people money, that moment that we did that brief period of time that we did that gives me hope. The advanced child tax credit gave me hope.
Yes.
We know,
Woo!
I mean, that was for 6 months, 6 million children were brought out of poverty. Like, millions of parents were able to just have a small, like, sigh of relief to feel their cortisol levels just drop ever so slightly, right? So those are things that give me hope. And the thing about it is, like, these ideas are already here, right? Like, in my book, I talk about how, so, you know, around the time, like, the second wave feminism, right, when Betty Friedan was like, the feminine mystique, go find meaning outside of the home, again, great. But while Betty Friedan was preaching that, people like Johnny Tillman, right, and the National Welfare Rights Organization were looking at the same situation in America, and what their idea was, a guaranteed income for everyone. That we actually got sort of close to it happening under, of all things, the Nixon administration, right? But we didn't, and then we got these narratives of welfare queens in the 1980s, right? But so what I love is that there's, like, this is what gives me hope. Women of color
yes.
who are out here, who have never stopped organizing, who are the reason why we have anything good in this country, right? Like, it is time to revisit those ideas, and we are, in fact, revisiting them, right? And, you know, there's movements that have happened in the past that are as relevant as ever. I'm talking like Selma James and Sylvia Federici and the Wages for Housework movement. Just talking about that, right? Like, we are talking, again, like, to me, like, the payments that we got during the pandemic are a version of that, right? It's not that far off. It's sort of adjusting to, as, you know, as Heather was saying, and as you were saying at the beginning, and Natalie was saying at the beginning, like, we really need to restructure our economy around care. Care is the only work people actually have to do. Everything else is made up. We made up money, right? All of it, right? And I'm like, I'm here to like redo everything, but in the absence of that, I'm here to like give people cash and share the wealth that we already have, right? So those things give me hope. And then, I mean, I want you to talk about the work that you're doing at Community Change around childcare justice and supporting that work and things that are happening at the state. Like, I know I have a friend out here in the audience who I met at Guaranteed Income Now last year who's working on New Yorkers United for Affordable Childcare, right? Because I know that in the last couple of weeks, a story came out that to raise a child in New York, it's $45,000 a year for childcare, which is like more than a lot of families make. And it's more than college, right, for some people. And so I'm hearing like people who are organizing to do this, people who don't even have children, who understand that like these kinds of things are an investment in all of us. And so that's the stuff that gives me hope, is that all of these ideas are like firmly within grasp, like they are here. We don't need to reinvent anything. We need to pick up the ideas that are around, and I feel like everyone here understands this. Like, they are here, they're for the taking, for the sharing, and they benefit us all.
Yes. So I want to bring back something that you wrote into this moment, which is we are at this inflection point, a once-in-a-generation moment to invest in the people who mother children, whether bound by blood or affection. And, you know, there's more than ideas really moving around. I want to bring in some of Community Change's work here and some of the work being led by people, by providers, by parents who have said, enough is enough. We've got ideas about how to change and build this infrastructure in our states. We're gonna get to the federal government and what that unfinished business is and how we get it done. But there is work all over the country right now where states are actually paving the way, as so often happens, and the federal government is in a position to really catch up. So when you ask me, or when I think about what gives me hope in this moment, I think about our change makers. These are people, mostly women of color in all 50 states, working and demanding to build this kind of infrastructure, right? And I wanna bring in a few states. I don't know if Ben, are you in the crowd? I see Ben, okay.
Ben.
So Ben from Maine, right? After years of organizing in the state of Maine, there are new state investments in childcare and paid family and medical leave. Like, can we give it up for the Maine People's Alliance over here? So their coalition secured funding to double the recurring monthly stipends for all childcare providers in the state to an average of $400 a month, with stipends tiered based on education and experience. Okay, like that is something that is happening and moving in the ground right now as we're sitting here, right? So that gives me hope. When I think about possibility on this issue, I think about New Mexico. And the fact that New Mexico, after a decade of organizing, won a statewide ballot initiative to guarantee funding for universal child care that invests in care providers. Can we give it up for New Mexico? Like, they are showing us what is possible right now.
I think even on like more local levels, I'm thinking about Multnomah County, which is where Portland, Oregon is based. They voted to fund through taxes universal pre-K for people, and that's being implemented. So that's a huge win.
Yes, yes. I'm here to name all of them.
There's state work, and I'd love to hear more about that state work that you're supporting. And then I think it's like we need everyone at all levels, right? And I think those of us who understand care we're taught that care is private. right? It happens in our homes. The work is invisible. We're not really supposed to talk about it. It's sort of shameful to need help, when meanwhile, to be a human being is to exist in a state of needfulness at all times, unfortunately. But that's like, it's a beautiful thing to support other people and to lean into that, right? But I'm seeing, like people are, I'm thinking about, I know that domestic workers have been doing this. We're seeing domestic workers' Bill of Rights being passed in cities like New York, in Seattle, right? We're also, the narrative change work that I do, I'm in front of audiences who are not audience necessarily like you, who are engaged in this work at an organizing level. They're people who are like harried parents, right? Who, it's a miracle that they had the time to read a book, and I'm always very honored that they came to like be there. And people are like, what can I do? And another thing that happens, and this is part of it, like it's ground up, it's different, but it's, there's a great organization called Hand in Hand. Like people are starting to understand that, yes, shout out to Hand in Hand.
Woo!
People are starting to understand that if you hire someone to work in your home, you are an employer, right? That person's not doing it for love, right? Like there is love involved, and that's the beautiful thing about care, but they're doing it for a paycheck, right? And you can formalize these agreements. You can begin to, people are wanting, and this is where like this work coincides. Like I hear from people all the time who are not connected to organizing work, but who are like, I want to live my values. Like I want to live my values more. I've just never actually been challenged. I've never acknowledged, I've never really seen the privilege that I have to do that. And I think like in assuming good intent with people, like there are so many people, right, who have this cares, this unifying thing. You start to have a care story and you realize like, oh, like it's not, I'm not alone in this, right? And so that can lead to like workplace solidarity where you can ask for things and sort of stick your neck out. But it is also, it's just a way that we can start to come together on these things. Like, and I know that like 7 or 8 out of 10 US voters support care policies, like community-funded childcare, and just community-funded care for people of all ages, right? And when you're talking about those numbers, that totally transcends party lines, right?
Yes.
And so, like, we have to remember that we are a caring majority, right, in this country, and that we have the power to move things.
Yes.
Again, at all sorts of levels. Yeah.
Yes, I want to, as we celebrate how far we've come and we remember where we are, I do want to ground us in a few facts, which is that currently 1 in 3 childcare providers experience food insecurity due to poverty wages.
Right.
That families in most states pay more for childcare for 2 children than they do for housing. Let that sink in for a second. And that more than half of Americans live in a childcare desert where there are 3 or more children under the age of 5 for every childcare spot available. So I want to also stay on this hope theme.
Yes.
Right? Because our theory of change at Community Change is that the people who are impacted are the people who are really at the forefront, or who must be at the forefront of changing the laws and policies that impact and govern their lives.
Yes.
And that's what we're seeing. That when I read off these victories in New Mexico, for example, when I say it was a decade plus long of work and organizing, it was really that long. Yeah. It was a sophisticated strategy. It had an electoral component. It had an advocacy component. It had an electeds component. And so it had a we need to grow our base component. We need to bring more people in, and those people need to be able to speak about their lived experience and their ideas. This idea that ideas, operate at the elite level, ideas that move people, that ultimately result in the outcomes that we're fighting for, are championed by the people themselves.
Yes.
They're not just like taking the ideas that operate at this level.
Like lived experience.
Yes.
Which is their expertise. And yes, I couldn't agree more. The people who live closest to these problems are the people closest to solutions. And what we need to do is bring them closer to the power to effect that change.
So there are more states that we need to, so everyone's like, if you've got a watch list for 2024, let me name some states for you: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, here right in New York, Washington State, and more, right? So there's a ton that we can do until and as we continue to pave the way for changes at the federal level. So how are we feeling about this? How are we feeling about all of our states? Okay, let's getting better. I'll give you some credit. So I want to begin to close us with some reflections about what could have been and what has to be, okay? So there is actually a cost of not finishing this essential unfinished business. 2 years ago, think about where you were 2 years ago. Many of us in this room were fighting to get Build Back Better over the finish line with our priorities intact. That included $400 billion for childcare. If we had won, do you think about that? If we had won, we would have established and funded a sustainable childcare infrastructure for the first time in our country's history. $400 billion, a system that would have created an entitlement to make high-quality childcare affordable for every family who needed it, while valuing the care workers, the care providers that we're talking about, with the compensation they deserve for this essential labor. If we had won, we'd be on our way to building a child care system that works for families, for providers, and yes, for our economy. I don't want to rush through that, through $400 billion and what we could have right now. Not because I don't believe that it's in the past. That not accomplishing it 2 years ago somehow means we've lost the moment.
Right,
You know,
right.
we were talking in the green room about the moment. Has the moment passed?
Yeah, when you read that quote of like, I still believe that, you know, we are at an inflection point. It's a once in a generation moment. I was telling Lorella though, I was at an event last week in Portland, Maine, where the person I was talking to was like, has that moment passed? And I was like, oh dear. Like, because I have felt defeated at times, right? And then I was thinking about it like, you know, I think about something that Mariam Kaba says, which is that hope is a discipline. And I was like, I don't have the privilege of giving up, right? Like, and so I was like, let's think about time's a concept, like money, right? Like let's think about it in glacial time, right? Like, I have felt deeply frustrated. Like, I thought we won, right? When we put in this administration, right? An administration that ran on care, that I don't think has stuck with those values, but has also given away a lot, right? Like, the things that we were promised have not happened yet. Unfinished business, as you say. And so I was thinking, you know, like, yeah, like when I wrote my book, it was because like one of the things that spurred me on was like, I really felt like I was hearing from anybody with like any kind of social and financial privilege, and a lot of affluent white women who were like, this is it, like suddenly it's all been exposed. Our care system is like rubber bands and paper clips, and if your kid gets sick, then you're scrambling, right? And I really felt like there was a New York Times editorial that I read where someone was like, you're allowed in this economy to have like a child or a job, but like you can't have both. And I was like, okay, here we are. Like, women are angry, white women are angry, like we're gonna get this done, like this is our time, like everyone who's been working on this, we're made for this moment. And we are, right? But the thing is, as that sort of like fever pitch, like the urgency and like it's good. It's great that we have vaccines. It's great that we can be together, right? But the pandemic is still ongoing, but we are being told to like move on, right? As though like we all saw behind the curtain, and now what's happening is people are trying to close that curtain again, right? And like, I have not forgotten, right? Like, and I am never going to shut up about this. And I think like it is really like, to go back to this glacial moment, like what I realize is like time has distended for me, and like we are still very much in this moment. Right?
So I want everyone here to feel that moment, to sit with it for a second, and to feel agitated by the unfinished business and hopeful about the possibility to get it done. That the $400 billion for care at the federal level that we referenced in conversation, it's not just in the past or a missed opportunity. It is actually the unfinished business that we're gonna get done. And I wanna close by bringing in my mom into the space, by bringing in Angela Praeli, and the millions of people like her all across this country. that we remember that these are not just numbers that we're talking about, that there are real humans, real people who every day leave their home. Maybe they leave their 2 immigrant daughters in their apartment. They go in, they open the door to someone else's home, and they make sure that they can go out and do their work. And that they end up putting a lot on the line for people to be able to carry out their lives, their professions. And so may we walk out of this great hall with that urgent call to action to make sure that we honor the chelas of the world, that we honor our kids, our families, by really delivering on the unfinished business. Thank you all.
Yes.